The first thing I noticed was how dry the ham was. It stuck to my teeth and made me wish I had poured more gravy on it. I was also pretty sure the green beans had been cooked into surrender. I was thinking about excusing myself to the kitchen when my Aunt Karen stood up from her chair and cleared her throat. The sound cut through the low hum of side conversations and the scrape of forks against plates. And without realizing it, I felt my shoulders tense. "I have something I need to say," Karen announced, her voice carrying the kind of practiced seriousness that made everyone assume a toast was coming. The long table went quiet. 14 relatives across 3 generations turned toward her with polite expectation. "I did not want to do this here," she continued while smoothing the front of her bright red sweater. "But I cannot stay silent anymore. Not when family is at risk beside me." Daniel stiffened. I felt it immediately. He had instincts like that from years on the job. He always sensed trouble before it fully arrived. His hand hovered close to mine under the table, and my stomach tightened. Karen took a breath like she was bracing herself for applause or outrage. "Maybe both. I saw something last week that I cannot ignore," she said. "I was at the Walgreens on 5th Street picking up Frank's blood pressure medication, and I saw Emily in the parking lot." My heart dropped straight into my chest. My mouth went dry in a way that had nothing to do with the ham. She was sitting in her car and there was a man leaning into her window. Karen paused for effect and I could feel the attention sharpen. She said she thought maybe I was asking for directions, but then the man handed me a small orange bottle and I handed him cash. The silence around the table shifted from casual to icy. Forks froze halfway to mouths, and I felt every eye drilling into May, confronted her right there. Karen said, her chin lifting, "And do you know what she did? She drove away, would not even look at me." The story was unfolding exactly how she wanted it to. Every detail placed to make the conclusion unavoidably. Opened my mouth to speak, but she rolled right over me. "I have been reading about the signs," she went on. "Mood swings, secrecy, weight loss." She counted them off on her fingers like she was presenting evidence in court. "I am not trying to be cruel, Emily. I am trying to help. But this family deserves to know before you bring those habits into our home." My mother's face had gone pale. My father stared down at his plate, like the pattern in the china suddenly required intense study. My grandmother Margaret watched Karen with an expression I could not yet decipher. And the rest of them, cousins, uncles, aunts, stared at me like I had just confessed to something unforgivable. My mother whispered, her voice barely audible, "Is this true?" "No," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "It is not." "Then explain what Karen saw," someone said. I did not even know who. He drew in a slow breath. Daniel shifted closer and his fingers brushed my knee under the table, grounding me. "Let me explain," I said, "but I would like to ask something first." I turned directly to Karen. "When you saw me in that parking lot, why did you not come over? Why did you not actually speak to me instead of watching from across the lot?" Her eyes flickered for just a second. "I did not want to embarrass your. Maybe you did not want to get close enough to see what was really happening," I said. "Because if you had, you would have noticed that the man was not a dealer. He was a pharmacy technician, and the orange bottle was a prescription for my fiancé's mother." The air felt thick enough to wade through. Karen scoffed, but the confidence in her voice cracked. "That is very convenient. A technician doing business in a parking lot does when the customer is the family of a federal agent and needs controlled medication without attracting attention," I said, watching her face shift from certainty to confusion. Daniel reached into his jacket, and for one terrifying heartbeat, Karen flinched like she thought he was reaching for a weapon. Instead, he placed a leather wallet on the table and opened it. The gold badge caught the light. "Drug Enforcement Administration. Daniel Brooks, Special Agent. I have been with the agency for 8 years. The medication Emily picked up was metoprolol for heart arrhythmia. My mother takes it twice daily. We arrange secure handoffs because my job comes with risks and I do not want my family tracked through pharmacy records." No one spoke. "The technician's name is Luke," Daniel continued. "He has worked with us for 3 years, fully vetted. I can provide his employee number and contact details. If anyone here would like to verify that." Karen's mouth opened and closed without sound. "I drove away when I saw you because Luke told me someone was watching us and he felt uncomfortable finishing the exchange," I said. "He thought it might be surveillance. Turns out it was just my aunt inventing a story. I was trying to help," Karen stammered, her hand fluttering to her throat, "by accusing me of being a drug addict in front of my entire family on Christmas." I said, "You did not ask me privately. You did not verify anything. You staged a public confrontation based on something you half saw from 50 feet away." My grandmother set her fork down with deliberate calm. "Karen, did you speak to Emily before making this accusation?" I tried. Karen insisted, She drove past me because the technician was worried about the woman staring at us. I said. She never spoke to me. Margaret's eyes hardened. So you saw something you did not understand, created a narrative to explain it, and chose Christmas dinner to shame your niece. Publicly I was concerned you were gossiping. Margaret said. There is a difference. The shift was palpable. The weight of suspicion slid off my shoulders and settled squarely on Karen. My mother looked at her sister with disbelief hardening into anger. My father finally lifted his head and his jaw was clenched tight. Did you tell anyone else about this before tonight? My mother asked. Karen hesitated and that pause said everything. Who did you tell? I may have mentioned it to a few people, who Linda and Susan and the book club. My mother's voice shook. You told my friends that my daughter is a drug addict. I said I was worried that is the same thing. My mother snapped. You spread rumors without checking a single fact. The dinner unraveled from there. My Uncle Frank tried to calm Karen, but she was spiraling now, justifying herself, backtracking, claiming good intentions. Daniel leaned toward me and whispered if I was okay. I surprised myself by smiling. Better than okay, I murmured. I have been waiting years for this. Years, he whispered back. She has done this since I was a teenager. I said softly, always careful, always planting seeds. This is the first time she got caught. Margaret began lecturing Karen about false witness and integrity. My mother demanded timelines and names. My father confronted Frank about what he knew. Alliances cracked and shifted in real time. My cousin Rachel finally slammed her napkin down and apologized to me through clenched teeth. Eventually, my grandmother announced she was done eating and stood up. My parents followed soon after, refusing to salvage a holiday already burned. My mother hugged me tightly and apologized over and over, promising it would never happen again. Daniel and I drove home through empty streets, holiday lights blinking cheerfully at odds with the evening we had just survived. Welcome to the family, he said gently. Does she always do this? Not usually this loudly, I said. She prefers whispers, rumors, letting other people do the damage. I stared out the window and felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest. Relief mixed with resolve. This time she had gone too far, and she could not take it back. The car felt unusually quiet as we pulled away from my parents' house. The heater hummed softly, and the streets were almost empty, everyone else tucked inside homes that were not actively falling apart. I watched strings of colored lights blur past the window and let the adrenaline drain out of my body. My hands started shaking only after it was over. Daniel broke the silence gently, asking if I was all right without actually asking it out loud. His voice, low and steady like he was talking to someone in shock. I told him I was better than all right, which surprised both of us. I had not realized how much weight I had been carrying until it suddenly lifted. I told him that Karen had been doing versions of this since I was 15. Always subtle enough to deny, always quiet enough that by the time I found out what she had said the damage was already done. Rumors about boys, rumors about grades, rumors about favors and shortcuts. None of it true, and all of it sticky. He listened without interrupting, his jaw tight and his eyes forward on the road. When I finished, he said there was a legal name for what she had been doing, defamation, among other things. And hearing it framed that way made something click inside me. It was not just family drama, it was systematic harm, I admitted. I had thought about pushing back before, but it always felt extreme to confront an aunt publicly. He reminded me that she had accused me of criminal behavior in front of 14 people and had apparently spread it to others beforehand. That was not gossip, it was character destruction. The phrase sat heavy between us. Character destruction. It sounded dramatic, but accurate. For a decade she had been sanding away at my credibility and I had let it happen because peace felt easier than resistance. Daniel said professionally, if someone documented a pattern with witnesses and timelines, they could make a strong civil case. I stared out at the lights again, thinking about the table full of people who had just watched her unravel. I had witnesses now, not just stories. When I asked him what he would do, he said calmly that he would document everything, every rumor, every name, every date. Build a file so the next time could not be dismissed. The next morning my phone started ringing and it did not really stop for days. My mother called first, with a shaky voice and an apology that kept restarting. She told me that Linda had confronted her about my supposed problem, and she had corrected her loudly and thoroughly. By the afternoon Susan had called too, apologized for believing it and admitted she had heard it through the book club. Apparently that group had split cleanly in half, with some defending Karen and others demanding she explain herself. It was messy and loud, and for once none of it was my fault. Karen herself went silent. No calls, no messages, no passive posts online. My cousin Rachel reported that she had locked herself inside and was only speaking to her husband. She was embarrassed, Rachel said, but unwilling to admit it. In her mind, she had been attacked for caring too much. The apology, when it came, was not really an apology. It arrived in a group message on the last day of the year, and said she was sorry if her concerns had caused upset, and that she hoped we could move forward with love. I stared at it for a long time, feeling the old reflex to smooth things over, rise up Daniel. Read it over my shoulder, and his reaction was immediate and sharp. He said it was not an apology, it was damage control. I knew he was right, and for the first time I did not feel tempted to accept crumbs. I typed a response slowly and carefully, making it clear she had accused me publicly and privately without verifying facts, that it was defamation and that I was documenting everything. I stated calmly that any further false statements would result in legal consultation. Then I sent it before I could retreat. The reaction was instant. Messages flying in from relatives, shocked that I had finally pushed back. Some supportive, some stunned. Karen did not reply, but her husband called within minutes, and I let it go unanswered. When my mother called, I explained that boundaries were not threats. There was a long pause, and then my mother surprised me by saying she was proud. She admitted she should have stood up to her sister years ago, and maybe consequences were overdue. I cried quietly after we hung up, feeling something mend that I did not know was broken that night. Daniel poured us wine, and we stood on the balcony watching fireworks bloom over the city. When he asked about resolutions, I told him I was done retreating from anyone about anything. He clinked his glass against mine and said he would stand with Mitha. Days after felt like aftershocks. Updates trickling in about who had heard what and when. I wrote everything down, names, dates, exact phrases. It was exhausting but empowering. For once, I was not scrambling to fix lies, I was recording them. Karen remained quiet, and part of me hoped it would last. But another part knew her patterns too well. Silence was usually a reset, not a surrender. Still, I enjoyed the calm while it lasted, and focused on building a future where her voice did not dominate the room. By the time the new year settled in, I felt different. Steadier. I had evidence and witnesses, and a partner who believed me without hesitation. Whatever came next, I would not face it alone, and I would not pretend it was harmless again. The quiet did not last as long as I wanted it to. It rarely ever did with Karen. By the time winter started giving way to early spring, I had almost convinced myself she might finally back off. The file sat untouched on my laptop for weeks, and life began to feel normal again. Work routines, dinners with friends, wedding planning conversations that felt light instead of defensive. Then my mother called one afternoon with a tone I recognized immediately. Careful, measured, trying not to alarm me while absolutely alarming me. She told me Karen had started talking again, and this time the story had shifted. No more parking lots or pills, just concern and worry wrapped in sympathy. According to her, Karen was telling people I was unstable, that I had overreacted at Christmas, that I had threatened her, that Daniel was controlling me and putting ideas in my head. The implication hung heavy and ugly. I felt my stomach knot, but my mind stayed strangely clear. Who has she told? I asked. Already reaching for the notebook on the coffee table, Linda heard it first, but she came straight to me. My mother said quickly, "Apparently Karen has been leaning into church friends, saying she is worried about you." It was the same playbook with a new label. Plant the seed, let it spread, deny responsibility later. Except this time, I was not scrambling or shocked. I felt prepared in a way I never had before. "Thanks for telling me, Mom," I said calmly. "I will handle it." Called Daniel immediately. He stepped out of a meeting to take my call and listened without interrupting as I explained exactly what Karen was saying and who had heard it so far. When I finished, there was a pause, and then he said it was textbook retaliation. He explained that claiming I made threats crossed into dangerous territory, that it could edge into false reporting or harassment if left unchecked. When I asked what we should do, he did not hesitate. We used the file, everything we had documented since Christmas, witnesses, timelines, statements, patterns. He said we send a formal cease and desist letter and make it clear that further false claims will result in legal action. I asked if that would really work, and he said the point was not just to scare her, but to create an official paper trail. If she kept going after formal notice, it strengthened any future case considerably. The letter went out the following week through a lawyer Daniel knew from work. Someone experienced with harassment cases, who understood exactly how calculated behavior like this could be. Karen received it on a Friday afternoon. By Saturday morning, my phone would not stop ringing. Her husband called first, furious and indignant, demanding to know how I could do this to family. I let it go to voicemail. My grandmother called next, sounding concerned but unsurprised. Then Rachel called, half horrified, half impressed. She told me Karen was spiraling, saying she was being attacked and persecuted. Finally, Karen herself called and I let that go to voicemail. Her message was tearful, frantic, layered with justifications. She said she never meant harm, she was only trying to protect the family. She could not believe I would involve lawyers. She asked if I knew how much stress I was causing and accused me of tearing the family apart. I saved the voicemail and added it to the file. Month later, a formal letter arrived from Karen's lawyer. It was stiff and clearly drafted under pressure. It acknowledged that she had made statements that could be misinterpreted and committed her to refraining from further commentary about my personal life. It was not perfect and it did not feel sincere, but it was in writing, and that mattered. Daniel asked if I thought she would actually stop, and I told him probably not forever. But now she knew there were consequences. Standing up like that changed something fundamental in me. I could feel it settling into place. I was no longer reacting, I was responding. No longer defending myself blindly, but asserting boundaries with clarity. June arrived quickly after that, and with it our wedding. We kept it small on purpose, 50 people, a garden venue, sunlight filtering through trees, laughter instead of tension. My parents were there, my grandmother to Rachel, and a handful of close friends. Karen was not invited. She sent a card anyway with a generic congratulations, and I threw it away without hesitation. The act felt simple and final. During the reception, my grandmother pulled me aside. She wore blue with pearls and that familiar sharp intelligence in her eyes. She told me she was proud of me for standing up to Karen and admitted no one else ever had. She said some battles wait until we are ready to fight them, and that I was ready now. She smiled and told me to take care of my husband, and joked that any man willing to flash a badge at Christmas dinner to defend me was a keeper. I laughed and told Daniel later that he had earned her respect permanently. He said he was more scared of her than anyone he had ever arrested, and I believed him. As the sun set and music drifted through the garden, I looked around at the people celebrating with us and felt a deep sense of clarity. This was my family. The ones who showed up believed me and stood with me when it mattered. Karen had tried for years to make me an outsider. Someone to whisper about, someone to doubt. She almost succeeded more than once. But not anymore. When Daniel pulled me onto the dance floor and held me close, I felt grounded and safe in a way I never had before. The past no longer felt like something chasing me, it felt contained, documented, understood, somewhere else. Karen was likely nursing her resentment, rewriting the story in her head. But for the first time that narrative no longer controlled my life. The music slowed and we swayed together. Surrounded by people who knew the truth, I rested my head against Daniel's shoulder and understood something clearly and completely. I was done being afraid of her, done shrinking to keep peace, done letting lies define me. That Christmas accusation meant to destroy me had instead exposed her and freed me, and I was never going back to the version of myself who let it happen. Life after the wedding settled into something calm and steady, the kind of calm that feels earned rather than fragile. Daniel and I fell into routines that felt like building instead of surviving. Mornings with coffee, evenings with quiet dinners, weekends spent visiting friends or planning small trips. And for the first time in years, I did not feel like I was waiting for the next shoe to drop. The file still existed, tucked neatly into a folder on my laptop. I did not open it often, but knowing it was there gave me a strange sense of peace. It was proof not just of Karen's behavior, but of my own resolve. Evidence that I had stopped pretending harm was harmless. For a while, Karen truly disappeared from my life. No calls, no messages, no secondhand stories filtering through relatives. My mother mentioned once that Karen was keeping a low profile at church and social events, quieter than anyone could remember. People who once orbited her gossip now kept polite distance. That silence did not mean remorse. I understood that much. It meant caution, and caution was something Karen had rarely exercised before. The power shift was subtle but undeniable. I noticed the difference most clearly during a family birthday gathering in early fall. Karen was there but restrained, her smiles careful, her comments neutral. When she spoke to me, she stuck to safe topics like the weather and the food, never once venturing into personal territory. I realized then that she was afraid, not of me exactly, but of consequences. And that realization did more to heal old wounds than any apology could have. Later that evening, my mother pulled me aside and admitted that watching Karen behave differently had been eye-opening. She said she had spent years excusing her sister's behavior as concern or personality quirks. Seeing her suddenly capable of restraint forced her to confront how deliberate it had always been. That conversation mattered more than I expected. It felt like validation long overdue. Not just of the Christmas incident, but of every smaller, quieter hurt that had piled up over time. Daniel noticed changes too. He commented once that I carried myself differently now, less guarded, more direct. I stopped apologizing reflexively and started saying no without cushioning it. The world did not collapse when I did, and that still surprised me sometimes. There were moments when guilt tried to creep back in, usually triggered by comments from extended relatives about family unity or forgiveness, old conditioning whispering that I had gone too far. But each time I revisited the facts, the lies, the pattern, the harm, and the guilt dissolved. Curran had made choices repeatedly and deliberately. All I had done was refuse to absorb the damage quietly anymore. One afternoon, Rachel called me laughing softly and said, Karen had complained that people no longer trusted her like they used to, that she felt judged and isolated. The irony was sharp and unmistakable. Rachel asked if I felt bad about it, and I surprised myself by answering honestly. I felt sad that it had come to this, but I did not feel responsible. Those feelings were not mutually exclusive, and realizing that was another step forward. As the months passed, the story shifted again within the family. Not Karen's version, but a quieter, more accurate one. People referenced the Christmas dinner as the moment things changed. The moment lines were drawn and patterns exposed. No one said it outright, but everyone understood. At Thanksgiving the following year, Daniel and I hosted a small gathering at our place. My parents came, my grandmother Rachel, and a few close friends. Karen was invited out of obligation and declined, citing a headache. No one seemed disappointed that night. After everyone left, Daniel and I sat on the couch, surrounded by half-empty plates and soft music. He asked if I ever thought about what might have happened if he had not been there that Christmas. I thought about it carefully and said, the truth. I probably would have survived it, but I would not have confronted it. His presence had accelerated something that was already overdue. He did not create my strength, but he helped me use it. That distinction mattered to me. I did not want to believe my ability to stand up for myself depended on someone else. I wanted to own it fully. By winter, the fear that once defined my relationship with Karen felt distant, almost abstract. I could remember it intellectually, but it no longer lived in my body. My shoulders stayed relaxed in rooms she occupied, and my voice did not shrink. Most telling moment came during a casual conversation at a family gathering when someone repeated a small, inaccurate detail about my work. Nothing malicious, just wrong. Karen opened her mouth like she was about to correct it, or twist it, and then stopped herself. She glanced at me and said nothing. I corrected the detail calmly and moved on, but inside I felt a quiet triumph. Not because I had won something, but because I no longer needed to fight. My presence alone was enough. That realization marked the true end of her power over me. Not the letters, not the lawyers, not the badge, but the absence of fear. Karen still existed in my life. Technically, but she no longer occupied space in my thoughts. I did not check for her reactions or brace for her opinions. She had been reduced to what she always should have been, just another relative with limits. One evening my grandmother called me unexpectedly, her voice warm and reflective. She told me she had been thinking about her own younger years and the ways she had tolerated behavior she should not have. She said, watching me stand firm had given her a sense of closure. She did not know she needed that call. Stayed with me. It reminded me that change ripples outward in ways we cannot predict. That setting boundaries is not selfish but instructive. As the year turned again, I found myself reflecting not on Karen but on how far I had come. The girl who once swallowed rumors silently had become a woman who documented facts and spoke clearly. The shift was not loud or dramatic, but it was permanent. Daniel noticed my reflection and asked what I was thinking about. I told him I was grateful, not just for him but for the version of myself I had become. He smiled and said he liked this version a lot. He did. Karen never tried another public accusation. There were no more whispers that reached me. Whether because she learned or because she knew she would be exposed again hardly mattered. The result was the same though. Truth had outlived the lie and I had outgrown the fear. Whatever stories Karen told herself, now they no longer included me as a silent participant. I had reclaimed my narrative, and with it a peace I once thought was impossible. The months that followed felt like a long exhale, not dramatic or celebratory but steady and real, the kind of peace that settles in slowly and proves it is staying. Daniel and I continued building our life together in ways that felt intentional, choosing calm, choosing honesty, choosing distance from anything that thrived on chaos. Karen remained mostly quiet. When her name came up in conversation, it was usually followed by a shrug or a change of subject. People had learned without needing it spelled out that repeating her stories came with risk. Not from me threatening or correcting loudly, but from the simple fact that her credibility no longer held. I noticed that when family gathered, conversations flowed more easily. There was less careful navigation, less coded language. The tension that used to sit under everything had lifted. It was not because Karen had changed fundamentally, but because her influence had finally been contained. My mother admitted one afternoon over coffee that she felt lighter too. She said she had not realized how much energy she had spent smoothing over her sister's messes and making excuses. Letting that role go had been freeing in ways she was still discovering that admission mattered. It closed a loop I had carried quietly for years. Knowing my mother saw it now, knowing she understood that silence had not been neutral but costly, Daniel continued to be steady and supportive without ever taking center stage. He never framed the situation as something he had fixed. Instead, he reminded me gently that I had drawn the line and held it. His respect for my autonomy deepened my own confidence. One evening, while organizing old files on my computer, I came across the folder labeled with Karen's name. I opened it and scrolled through the documents, statements, timelines, saved messages. It felt strange to see so much pain reduced to orderly evidence. I realized then that I no longer needed it emotionally. It existed now only as insurance, proof tucked away in case it was ever required again. I closed the folder without hesitation and did not feel the old surge of anger or fear that was how I knew I was truly free of it. The final confirmation came unexpectedly at a larger extended family event. One of those gatherings where distant relatives drifted in and out and conversations overlapped. Karen was there, sitting near the edge of the group, watching more than speaking it. One point, a distant cousin mentioned the Christmas incident in a vague way, saying how awkward that year had been. The room went quiet for a moment and all eyes flicked briefly toward Karen. She looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Did not defend herself, did not rewrite the story. She simply stayed silent. The conversation moved on naturally and I felt no urge to step in. That silence spoke louder than any apology ever could. Rachel leaned over and whispered that Karen had complained privately that no one listened to her anymore. I smiled softly and told her that maybe that was not the worst thing. Rachel laughed and agreed. Driving home that night, Daniel asked how I felt seeing her like that. I thought carefully before answering and realized the truth surprised me. I did not feel victorious or cruel, I felt neutral. And neutrality felt like peace. Karen had become a background character in my life rather than an antagonist. Someone whose choices no longer dictated my emotional weather. As time passed, new challenges replaced old ones. Career decisions, home projects, conversations about the future. None of them were overshadowed by the need to manage someone else's behavior. The mental space that freed up felt enormous. I understood then how much energy I had wasted anticipating attacks that never needed to be anticipated, bracing myself for accusations before they formed. Living slightly hunched to avoid becoming a target, standing upright felt natural now. One afternoon, my grandmother, Margaret, sat with me in her living room, sunlight slanting across the floor. She spoke quietly about her own past and the ways women in her generation were taught to endure rather than confront. She said watching me had been both painful and healing. Painful because she recognized old mistakes, and healing because she saw a different ending. She told me she hoped I would teach any daughters I might have that boundaries were not cruelty and that truth did not need permission to be spoken. I promised her I would. That promise stayed with me. It felt bigger than Karen, bigger than our family. It felt like a line drawn forward into something better. Daniel and I talked about it later that night. About cycles and patterns and what it meant to stop one instead of passing it on. He said quietly that courage often looked like discomfort at first and peace later. I agreed. Karen never apologized properly and I no longer cared. The need for acknowledgement had faded along with the fear. What mattered was the outcome, not the performance. The story she tried to write about me never stuck because I refused to play my assigned role. That refusal had cost me comfort in the short term but earned me freedom in the long term. Looking back, I could see how carefully she had relied on silence and politeness to protect herself. How easily that protection collapsed once exposed to light. Lies did not survive scrutiny, and neither did power built on intimidation. I sometimes wondered if she learned anything at all. But then I realized the answer did not affect my life. Learning was her responsibility, not mine. The truth had already done its work. When friends asked me about family boundaries, or gossip, or conflict, I told them my story honestly without dramatics. I emphasized documentation, clarity, and the importance of believing yourself even when others tried to rewrite ethos. Conversations felt like another quiet victory, turning pain into something useful rather than something hidden. In the anniversary of that Christmas, Daniel and I stayed home, cooked dinner together, and laughed about how dry the ham had been. The memory no longer stung, it simply existed. A marker of when everything shifted. Raised a glass and thanked him again for standing beside me. He smiled and corrected me gently, saying he stood with me, not for me. The difference mattered, and I loved him for understanding it. As the night settled, I felt gratitude for the unlikely chain of events that had led me here, for the accusation meant to shame me that instead revealed the truth, for the courage that rose when I finally stopped retreating. Karen had tried to make me small and silent. Instead, she forced me to become clear and unafraid. The life I was living now was proof that standing up once could change everything that followed. I no longer measured rooms for danger or weighed words for safety. I spoke plainly, trusted my instincts, and walked away when necessary. That was the real victory. Not her silence but my voice. Whatever stories Karen told herself, now they belonged to her alone. My story was settled, grounded, and finally my own.